don't think we can be the manufacturing powerhouse and be anti-immigrant at the same time. I don't think it makes sense. Now, December 2019 is the first confirmed case of COVID in China. So then it's like, again, like a point of reflection, like, I don't know what COVID is. If I stay, will I die here? I've probably been locked in my own apartment, maybe 4 or 5 times. We basically did COVID tests every day. It's chaotic. Tariffs don't work. Tariffs end up hurting Americans. China surveils us and tells us they do, and America does it in secret. What are we talking about, you know? Shanghai is one of the most capitalist cities I've ever seen. Shanghai makes New York look poor.
What rumor would you like to dispel?
I see a lot more things in common than I do see different.
Josh, you grew up in the south side of Chicago and ended up graduating from MIT with a degree in mechanical engineering. So how did you end up in China?
Yeah. So at MIT, I studied mechanical engineering. I also effectively got a minor in Mandarin Chinese. I did so many Chinese classes there. And then after graduation, I was looking at several opportunities, a few fellowships, looking at different job opportunities, tried to big through consulting. None of those things panned out. What I ended up working out was this program called the Swordsman Scholars Program. It's a 1-year, fully funded master's degree in Tsinghua University in Beijing. It's funded by Steve Swordsman, the guy who created Blackstone. It's a really great 1-year immersion into what is contemporary China, U.S. relations across different verticals of policy, international relations, econ, tech. Great immersion into where we are as a global society. So that was a lot of fun. Finished that, graduated from that in June 2019. And then at this point, I'm like, okay, I could go to Silicon Valley and do what my friends are doing there, start a startup or join someone else. But I'm in China. I want to improve my Mandarin. I want to see the real stuff. I want to see the factories. I want to get my hands dirty. You know what I mean? Because when else in life am I going to make a decision to stay in China, right? So it was just at that point, I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to stick it out. You know, I didn't get my first or second choice for my first job in China, but I got a job. I moved to Shenzhen, working as a mechanical engineer and product designer at a small design firm. And that was October 2019. Now, December 2019 is the first confirmed case of COVID in China. So then it's again, a point of reflection. I don't know what COVID is. If I stay, will I die here? Do I stick it out? I think I'm healthy. I think I can figure it out. I don't know when COVID's going to end in this country. But, all of these decisions where it's just this could be the end of my China journey, or I could choose to continue through this.
So you were there for all of COVID?
For all of COVID. 3.5 years. From basically early 2020 to mid 2023, I didn't leave China. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. So in the United States, depending on what part of the country you were in, your experience of COVID was very different. So I was at the time in Washington, D.C., and they treated COVID very seriously there. So people, I will say, even March of 2020 is when it really hit in the United States, when we did our 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing. And a year and a half later, people in DC were still wearing masks outside. But now I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, where, depending on who you ask, COVID never really happened. So they definitely did not treat COVID precautions in the same way. And I'm curious, for the Americans in the audience, what was the height of COVID like in the part of China you were?
For sure. So in the south of China, in Shenzhen, for those that don't know, Shenzhen is basically it's a border cross away from Hong Kong, which is basically the southernmost point of China, basically. So in the south of China, COVID really, really started January 2020. We all knew something was going on. The world didn't know yet. We're trying to figure out what to do, if we stay, if we go. I was traveling at the time, came back to Hong Kong. And then the borders closed. All the borders closed to get into mainland China by May 2020. It was such a case where if I didn't return to mainland China at that point, there's no telling when the next opportunity would be. So I ended up returning. So after those borders closed, May 2020, wait about a month till June 2020, life is back to normal. Everything is back to normal. We are outside, we're eating, all the COVID patients have been quarantined. They have strict government controls over the cities that have that issue. In Shenzhen at that time, it was just Yeah, we're wearing masks. We have to have like our little cards to get in and out of our communities. They also have contact tracing, city travel tracing based on your phone number, green, yellow, red contact tracing system where basically if you don't have a green code, you're not allowed to enter public spaces. And if you have a yellow code,
Wow.
if you have a red code, you need to be sent to a hospital immediately. And yellow code is like quarantine yourself. They built out this extensive infrastructure of monitoring for close contacts, and it was pretty effective, honestly, from like 2020 up until from 2020 up until 2021. I think by the time of 2022, it lost control. We got a variant, I think it was like the Delta strain or something, or Omicron or something that came from South Africa. The variant spread quickly. It spread a lot quicker than basically the government was able to handle. But that didn't stop them from trying. So what that meant is that in 2022, basically we did COVID tests every day. The best ones were the mouth swabs. The worst ones were the nose swabs. So it's like the poking in your brain. And I've probably been locked in my own apartment maybe 4 or 5 times from that year just because there was a close contact. I still didn't have COVID, but they'll lock you down for 2 weeks at a time. If you've been anywhere, if there's any like chance, lock down immediately.
So during that time, how did you just have to be expected to like keep a stock of 2 weeks worth of food and drink at all times?
The delivery services, the food delivery services are still operational, but it's such a case where it's like, I think one of the lockdowns I did buy a bunch of food ahead of time, knowing that the lockdown was coming. I think because I don't cook, so like, I must have ate food somehow. Like I was definitely
Right.
ordering food. Um, yeah,
Thanks for sharing your story about COVID. I think people would be interested to hear how different it was. So I know that while you've been in China, you have worked in manufacturing, right? Can you talk to me about some of the companies that you've worked for?
sure, sure. So my first company was a small product design company called Noah Labs. Basically, the vision of this company is to be a full end-to-end service provider for people who have an idea for an electronic product they want to do. So at this company, you come with your idea, we can help you refine the idea, create the industrial design, go through the R&D process, get you to a working prototype, and then ideally scale you up from 1 to 100 to 1,000, kind of using established practices for building a new mass manufacturing operation.
So you don't even have to have the product fully designed and the manufacturing set up already. Like you can come to a company with just an idea and they can help you through that process.
As long as you got money. Yeah, dude. Yeah. That tends to be the stopgap for most people is like, I want to do this, but I only have $2,000. No, sorry. It's not going to happen. But yeah, that was the vision of the company. So they had their teams of firmware, software, mechanical engineers, industrial designers, product development. Like they provided the full suite of services. So it was cool. It was cool. I learned a lot. Definitely learned a lot there. That was the company where I think my Mandarin improved the quickest because it was like 10% foreigners. So it's like, I need to speak this language or I can't communicate with my engineering team. Yeah. So I was basically half mechanical engineer, meaning that like I'm sitting at the computer playing with SolidWorks, designing the enclosures for like smart rings, smart watches, like things like that. And then half project manager, meaning that like I'm managing teams of other mechanical, electrical, and firmware engineers to try to execute projects, and then managing relationships with factories, supply chains, and trying to make sure all the pieces are moving in concert. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. Painful, low salary, basically like 25K USD a year. That got to my ego. That was a tough pill to
How
swallow.
how far does 25K USD go in China?
25K USD in a top tier city, I call them tier 1 cities in China. Tier 1 cities are basically like huge cities of like 20 plus million people that are kind of industrial and capital bases of China. So Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Chongqing, these are tier 1 cities. They're huge, huge cities, huge
Like New
powerhouses
York
of
City.
resources. Exactly. Exactly. It's like a New York versus New Jersey.
Shout out to
Yeah.
New Jersey.
Yeah. So in the tier 1 cities, 25K USD a year is considered above average. So people do make their livings on that and make their livings on much less. Yeah.
Wow. Wild. Okay. So you're making 25K at this company and then eventually you
Yeah.
leave. Where do you go
Yep.
next?
So after that company, I joined Apple June of 2021, joined their camera R&D engineering project management team, still based out of Shenzhen, China. So in this role, I was basically like a firefighter for production. which is to say, when we're doing right before we do mass production of any of the modules, a display, a microphone, a button, a camera, there's going to be an NPI process. NPI stands for new product introduction. So it's in this context, it's the process of scaling up and stabilizing your production operations, right? Which vendors, right? If you talk about a camera, for example, there's a lens, there's a sensor, there's a barrel, right? There might be 3 vendors for the lens, 3 vendors for the barrel, 3 vendors for the sensor. Which of these combinations work the best? When we're assembling them together, which combinations of other parameters work the best, like the glue that we're using to affix one thing to the other, or the gold wiring that we're using to like attach the ICs, the sensor ICs to the other PCBs in the device. Like, which of these combinations all work together to give us the most consistent process for building millions of cameras? So that's basically my job, was basically to monitor this whole cycle.
Wow.
And I spent effectively every day working out of a factory in China for 4 years at Apple, talking to their project management teams and then dealing with any emerging issues, right? So it could be anything. It can be like a design issue that's actually Apple's fault. It could be a process issue that's the factory's fault, a human resource issue where they're too constrained and like it's affecting the project timeline and deliveries, upstream supply chain issue, a critical technical issue that no one understands the root cause of. Like all of these things, right?
And
The project management team,
you're trying
yeah,
to put out all these fires, like a firefighter,
yeah.
like you said.
So that's a
So you're
fire,
kind of
just
like
like
a
a
jack of all
firefighter.
trades.
I would hope so. I
Yeah.
would hope so at this point. But it was
So
it was a
then,
lot of fun, a lot of learning. Yeah,
so how long were you at Apple?
I was there for 4 years. So June 2021 to April 2025.
Wow. So you just left this
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
And what are
yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
doing now?
So now I am running my own manufacturing consultancy called the Sparrows, where we basically help Western companies find, manage, develop, and control their supply chains in China. So when we talk about product development, right, building a new hardware product, let's say we're building a smartwatch, for example, right? I think America has no shortage of engineering talent, design talent, right? We've got that. We've got lots of that, right? So to
Sure.
get you from an idea to get an industrial designer involved to create something that's like user friendly and has an aesthetic, then to find the right engineers who can get you to the first working prototype, that's no problem, right? 0 to 1 in America will never be an issue for us. Now, going 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000, 1 to 1,000,000 in America is not economically feasible because we exported our supply chain to China 40 years ago. It is not feasible anymore. But which means that if you want to go through that process, you do tend to have to look at manufacturers outside of the States, outside of the West. And it's an entirely different skill set, right? It's no longer about me as a mechanical engineer creating the enclosure that properly encompasses this smart watch with the display, and then, talking to the electrical engineer and telling him that he only has this much real estate for his PCB. It's no longer that. Now it's about who are the vendors upstream of my supply chain? Do they have enough materials on hand to sustain a production of 5,000 units every month for the next few years?
Sure.
Do I have the certifications to sell these products in my target countries? Is my production process reliable? And do I have like mature quality control systems to ensure that when I've built something, if it isn't built correctly, it's caught before it goes out to a customer and wastes time, logistics, money, all of those things, right? So I think it's a different skill set to go from one to many. And
Sure.
that's where the Sparrows tries to come in and bring value. Based on the fact that we're based out of Shenzhen doing this work. Yeah.
So then presumably y'all are not, I mean, you're still feeding yourself, you're still living in a place, a residence. Presumably it's making money now.
Yeah, yeah, we're not starving. We started experimenting with this about a year ago. During those experiments, yeah, we had some positive feedback from early people we worked with.
So ultimately you became a founder anyway.
Indeed.
The thing you were trying to stay away from in San Francisco.
Indeed. Not that I want to stay away from being a founder in San Francisco, but that I didn't want to do the same things that everyone else is doing, I guess. I want to be cool, I guess, I want to
You
try a
sound pretty
different
cool.
path. Well,
You
thank you
sound
very
pretty cool
much,
for sure.
Anthony. Thank you very much.
So let me ask you this. There's a lot to unpack here, and I think to people in the United States listening, they'd be fascinated to learn about the manufacturing process in China and why, as you mentioned, there would be challenges if we tried to bring it back in the United States. And I don't know if you've been following at all any of Trump's tariffs and all that stuff. I'm sure that it's affecting, especially as a consultancy, how do your customers navigate through that process? And what is it about China's manufacturing that makes it the global powerhouse that it is?
We can start with the history and then we can start with the present situation. So, the history, the context, right? America exported a lot of its manufacturing capacity, especially for automobiles, to China, like in the 80s and 90s. And that's the story of Detroit's decline as well, right? And we did it for capitalist reasons because the labor was cheaper out here. Throughout the 90s, America continued to export its ability to kind of produce PCBs, electronics, these small components that are fundamental to electronics. Those are also gradually exported to places like Japan and then Taiwan. And then when companies like Apple started putting their high standards on manufacturers and supply chains that are based out in Asia, that I think became a catalyst for the electronics industry in Shenzhen. Basically, Apple wasn't in mainland China until I believe it was Foxconn, originally a Taiwanese company, that told them to come to mainland China because they would be able to get cheaper labor, get better value, and then the Foxconn team themselves would manage the locals. That kind of dynamic. So from there, right? So now we've got all of these Apple-related products that are being built out of Taiwan, out of China, but Apple doesn't own any of these production facilities. They end up being big customers for these facilities, which means that in that process of them having their very stringent requirements on these manufacturing facilities, they're kind of training a generation of engineers on how to build things. But at the same time, they're building out a supply chain that they especially need in China. But that supply chain can't just serve Apple, right? These companies that make these PCBs need other business, right? So from that, you have companies like Huawei and BYD. Huawei started as making Apple knockoffs, and BYD started as a battery component manufacturer for Apple.
Oh, wow.
And now they both make cars. So it's like, I think a lot of it can be traced to. There's this book called Apple in China that everyone should read because I think some of these ideas are coming from that. Some of these ideas are coming from like what I know about Shenzhen's history of tech. But all of this to say, America exported their manufacturing capacity to China a long time ago, made use of the labor here, and then in the process of doing that, inadvertently trained and created a highly expert industry for making consumer electronics.
So
Now, yeah.
what do you think? So let's say that I think Trump's interest and the current administration's interest is to bring back manufacturing jobs. And let's say that they were willing to pour a ton of money into that process. What would it take to build out a manufacturing network like China has with skilled laborers and the facilities? What would it describe for me if you were put in charge of that process? If Donald Trump came to you and said, "Hey, Josh, can you come and make us the global powerhouse that China has become?"
I have to structure my thoughts. First, I give you an anecdote about Shenzhen being a migrant labor city, and then we answer your question. Shenzhen is a migrant labor city, and Guangdong province in general is a migrant city. Guangdong province, Shenzhen especially, is where most of the world's consumer electronics are made, assembled, manufactured. This region of China has the same GDP as like South Korea. It's like
Wow.
91 million people. It's insane. But Shenzhen is a migrant city, which means that most of the people who come to Shenzhen are not from Shenzhen. They come to Shenzhen to work, right? So they're not with their families. They come by themselves. They come to make money. They're working. They call it 9 9 a.m., 9 p.m., 6 days a week. That's almost an expectation for some Chinese factories, for some Chinese commercial companies, right? Which is to say that there's a work ethic and a work culture in this part of the world, in this part of China, that I don't think is easy to find or replicate in other parts of the world. But, the key is that there are people who are coming en masse to this city to make money, to better their lives, right? That's, I think, a big part of like the Shenzhen magic. Now, how does America do something like that?
I don't think we can be the manufacturing powerhouse and be anti-immigrant at the same time. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it's viable because you're not going to work in an assembly factory, right? You're not going to be the one picking strawberries in a like field in California. There are immigrants who did those things because no American wants to do those things. So who has the right incentive structure to become the base workforce for a manufacturing powerhouse? It would have to be the immigrants, right? But, Trump has opinions on that too. I don't think he's in a very tenable situation uh, with bringing manufacturing back, but also pushing out all the people who do all the jobs that America doesn't want, including our manufacturing now.
Sure. And then presumably if you did want to use the homegrown Americans to fill these positions, you would have to pay them a significant amount of money to achieve that. And I think therein lies one of the major issues is the cost. So you described this, what was the word that you used to describe the working hours?
Um, 996, it just means 996 in Mandarin, which means 9 a.m., 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Yeah,
That's a lot.
that's a lot.
So let me ask you this. I think when Americans hear about these factories in China that are doing these things, they think of like child labor exploitation. They think that, hot and sweaty factories where people are working for very low cost. And presumably that's why we offshored this work because it was lower cost, which means that they're not making that much money. But that kind of seems to contradict what you were saying about it being a migrant country where people come to make more money than they could otherwise where they're from.
Well,
So
America has to understand one thing. America is 4% of the world's population, but 25% of its GDP. At least that's what I was told. Which means that our spending power, the purchasing power of the US dollar, and the costs associated with living a basic life in America are astronomical compared to anywhere else in the world. So, for a migrant worker in China who's getting something like $25,000 a year, if that, their meals are going to be 80 to 90 cents a meal. They can be as that cheap. Their rent can be as cheap as $400 to $500 a month. If they ride public transportation, that's 20 to 30 cents per journey, right?
uh,
So we're not on the same scale when we talk about like um, labor costs. We're on completely different scales.
So the way that most societies work though is that you start off at a low tier of your economic status is at a low tier. And then as you build and you develop industry, at least in a capitalist society, you start to become more wealthy and your expectations grow and the things that make you happy in life cost more money. So presumably everyone's income begins to rise and you can afford more goods and better goods and you become to expect a certain lifestyle. And if this started to happen 40 years ago in China, where we have sent all the jobs, then presumably these jobs become more competitive. They start to need to raise the salaries, and therefore they're raising the standard of living for all the people in the system. Do you think that this is ever going to get to a tipping point where the standard of living in China and the cost of doing business there rises so much that even China has to offshore their manufacturing? Like, do they send it somewhere else in 10 to 15 years because the standard of living has raised so much?
So the thing about Shenzhen being a migrant city is that I said that at tier one cities, the average salary is $25,000 a year. But we can imagine in much lower tier cities, maybe a city that's 2 million, 3 million people, maybe the average salary there is closer to $10,000 a year. They're still making a living, right? And it gets
Just not.
lower.
So you think we're just not near the boiling point then?
We're
Nowhere
not
near.
nearly close. Like there's an extreme concentration of wealth in China's major cities, and then the rest of the country, they're still trying to figure out the best way to distribute those opportunities. So yeah, I think there's a long way for China to grow. That being said, I think Chinese companies have already strategically started exporting their manufacturing for simpler things, right? Like apparel. Apparel is not included in my current conversation. When I talk manufacturing, I'm talking especially about consumer electronics. Apparel is the
Sure.
type of thing that is
I think, already proliferated through Southeast Asia, right? So you have many options available when it comes to, Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, when it comes to making clothes. So in a sense, maybe in the apparel market, that has already started to happen, where, the labor costs in these other countries are much more competitive compared to paying for the same labor in China.
That's wild. Cool. Thanks for answering those questions. So Josh, let me step back a little bit, and thanks for sharing all of your manufacturing expertise with us. You are, to describe you bluntly, a black man with tattoos, you got dreads, and you're from the south side of Chicago. Presumably, you like non-crazy Kanye. What's life like in China for you? I can't imagine how that must be to be you in a city filled with people that you're filled with. I mean, do people look at you when you walk down the street like you're a clown, you know? I hope you didn't take that offensively.
No, because I've felt that way before. I mean, in some of the more rural parts of China, yeah, the stares get intense. People start taking photos of you. They want to touch your hair. Definitely. In bigger cities, they're a little more chill. They've seen foreigners before. Um, I'll say, man, my first moments in China were definitely a challenge. That year I was studying and then moving to Shenzhen and living by myself. Um, I didn't know how to process all the staring. So sometimes people would be staring at me. I'm just like where I'm from, this is a sign of aggression. I don't know what's going on, but this is making me anxious, right? So imagine like walking in like a public park or something, and then like you walk through a crowd of 50 people, and they all just turn their necks. They're breaking their necks to stare at you. I'm losing my mind, trying to
Sure.
deal and process that. But what I've come to understand is that China, like anywhere, a country that doesn't have much exposure to people who look like me, or even people who look like you. There's not much exposure at all. There's not as many of us that come here. I think in a Shenzhen, in a city of 20 million people, there's like 30,000, 40,000 foreigners.
Wow.
That's a small percentage.
1%, not even?
Yeah, much less. Yeah, I'm not going to do that math. But yeah, you know what I mean. So it was challenging, but I contextualize it. They haven't seen me before. Mostly it's not like racism or, people trying to be antagonistic or anything. Mostly it's just curiosity. And, you kind of live with it. Like, I don't,
How do people react when you suddenly start speaking perfectly fluent Chinese?
yeah, like jaws drop for sure. There's a moment of pause for people. They try to speak to me in their best English attempt from high school level English, and then I'm just like, we don't have to do this. We can go to a language you understand.
Right.
At Apple, that was always fun. Teams that hadn't met me before, and they're like, should we speak English? And I'm like, 我们不用比较方便吧，因为这是你的语言. Of course, we don't need to use English. We use Chinese. I'm here to serve you. This is your language.
I can see how
It breaks down people's barriers. I know what I look like, right? I know how I look in America, how this looks in America, and I know it's probably perceived the worst when you leave. But the fact that I've decided to spend time learning your language to try to be able to have a better relationship with you, your culture, your country, and the things that are happening here, I think it does break down a lot of barriers in my case.
Yeah, I imagine it makes them respect you. And it's a unique position, and it makes sense why you would, you know, be a part of founding the Sparrows, because you can serve as this conduit to a world that other people outside of China wouldn't be able to gain access to. And it sounds like all pathways lead through China if you're trying to manufacture, electronic devices. That's fascinating. So Josh, let's take a step even further back, and I'm curious about what makes you and how you came to be the person that you are, because you strike me as incredibly unique. You have chosen such a unique career path, very different from some of our peers at MIT, and I kind of want to know more about what made you into this amalgamation of so much cool stuff. So talk to me about, how did you even get to MIT from growing up in Chicago?
Yeah. So we grew up in a pretty lower class working neighborhood. Not the safest place. Not the most put together part of Chicago. Mr. Chiefs keeps from. It's not one of the things I'm proud of. So I guess growing up, I was always just keenly aware of my mortality, of the fact that like I felt like I could die at any moment, whether it be from a gang violence or from police. I think my parents did a good job of making me fear the police from a very young age. Yeah, as a child, I'm just like, I don't want to be stuck in this. Like, this can't be the end of life. This can't be it for life. My mom was very intentional in like giving me exposure to college, at a young age, but these interesting programs like Lego robotics or doing game design classes at Northwestern or doing math classes at U Chicago. She always forced me to do these things during the summertime, even though I hated it. But what it ended up happening was through exposure to these programs, I kind of had an idea of what are my options in life outside of selling drugs, playing basketball, and being a rapper. It was much clearer. It was like, okay, I could be an engineer. I could be a video game designer. I can learn coding. I could, you know, I can learn a new language. My world was opened. And then from that point, I had a teacher in seventh grade who gave us the assignment to create a pamphlet for a college you want to go to in the future. And like, I don't know anything about anything, but I know I like engineering. I know that stuff is cool. I know Lego robotics is cool. Engineering is math plus science, so that's cool. So I just Google like, what's the best engineering school in the world? And it's like MIT. And I'm like, all right, bam, that's the one. Gotta go there. So 12 years old, I'm just like, I need to go to MIT. And it wasn't that I was just like, oh, I'm definitely going to get in. It was more so just like, I knew if I aimed for this as an objective, no matter what happens, I won't be dying in my neighborhood. Like, if I miss and I hit fifth place, I still won't be in this neighborhood. I will have given myself a much wider assortment of options in the future. So MIT was always the moonshot that somehow ended up happening. Yeah.
So seventh grade, you make this pamphlet that you want to go to MIT, and then anyone who lives in the United States knows that it's not a very easy thing to accomplish, and presumably you had to achieve a lot between seventh grade and turning 18 to get your foot in the door. And so, what was that pathway like? Once you set your sights on first place, how did you tackle that?
Yeah, so then, Chicago, they have what they call a selective enrollment program, where basically the best public schools in Chicago you have to test into. So I think I was a bit of a troublemaker, before I was 12 years old, because I'm just like, school is easy. I don't care about any of you guys. I was always throwing books in class, like, got into a few small altercations, small fights, whatever. But, by 12 years old, it's like, okay, I either do this shit and like I change my life or I'm going to get stuck here. So like, I went from like not trying in math class to like, getting the top score and being ultra competitive against like the second and third place math people in the class. Like, just kind of going all in on school. So from there, I went to Whitney Young, Michelle Obama's high school. And at the
Hey.
time, the best high school in Chicago. I still believe it's the best. And then it was just kind of head down working. I knew that schools like MIT want to see a very diverse portfolio in a candidate's background. So it's not enough for me to get straight A's, right? Even though, yeah, it's effectively what I did. I was one English teacher who gave me a B to teach me a lesson, but I ignore that and let's call it straight A's. It's not enough to get straight A's. You have to like be in an orchestra, play violin, join the math team, compete in competitions, do theater, help organize, theatrical productions. So these are all things I did because I thought they were fun, right? And these are things that I think help differentiate my profile from someone else who's applying who maybe didn't do any of these things, or maybe they were in leadership roles,
So did you do them just to check a box, or were you doing them because they were genuine interests?
They were genuinely interesting. My parents also made me start learning violin when I was 8 years old. My mom did. My mom's a tiger mom. Yeah. So I had that going. And then by the time I was in high school, I'm like, okay, I'm good enough to join the orchestra. Ended up making a lot of friends through orchestra. Loved it. I did math team kind of because I felt like I had to, like, because where I thought I was going to go. So I did that. I did theater purely out of interest. I'm just like, this is fun. This is so, look at these people. Look at all their makeup. Like, we just built this set out of wood and 2x4s. Like, this is cool. I did some science fairs. I got to like a finalist in the Illinois State Science Fair with a potato battery.
Wow.
I think it's funny. I don't understand. I mean, somebody liked it. So just doing a lot of things. But the goal was always MIT. Like if you ask any of my friends from that era, And people who weren't even in my class, they're like, yeah, you were obsessed with going to MIT and you actually did it.
So how many schools did you apply to when you applied to college? And surely it wasn't just MIT.
MIT, Stanford, Harvard, Villanova, Urbana-Champaign, maybe a Penn,
So a bunch of great schools.
Amherst. I was excited for that one. But yeah, I applied to quite a few. Stanford rejected me. I felt some type of way, but it didn't matter. Let me tell you this story.
Yeah.
So actually, I did this summer program at MIT called MITES, like MIT Introduction to Math and Science. That's the abbreviation. Or to engineering and science. And I did that in the summer and I came back for my senior year of high school and I'm doing my applications and applying to MIT. And I'm like, I'm going to get it early because I did this program. They're going to love me. And then I got deferred from like the December application round. And I'm just thinking
Sure.
like, I broke down. I'm like, damn, I'm a failure. Like I have to go to Harvard. Yeah, it was really, really messy because I had hyped myself up so much 5-6 years before that moment to like this is it, this is everything. What ended up happening, like, I emailed the MIT admission like, yo, what's happening, like what's going on, why don't you guys like me? And like, I don't know, but like you can like go talk, like, talk to your principal, have somebody advocate on your behalf, like have somebody reach out. So that's what I did. Like I went to my principal, I'm like, yo, like uh I don't know why MIT deferred me, but it's ridiculous because look at me. I'm awesome. I worked really hard. I have all this shit. Like, come on. My principal's like, okay, cool. So my principal ends up calling MIT on my behalf. I'm talking with MIT admissions and I'm just asking them, like, why, what was the decision around deferring Josh based upon? They told my principal that my SAT 2 scores in chemistry were too low. So based on that reason, they're like, we don't know. And then my principal was like, well, of course that's not going to be a problem. Look at everything else on his resume. What are we talking about? So she went to bat for me in that case, told me afterwards. And yeah, and then when Pi Day came that summer, or rather that following spring, I was touring Urbana-Champaign. I'm looking at their engineering program and like Urbana-Champaign looks pretty lit. They have like a very fun campus Greek life. Like it's like very collegey, like as we imagine it as Americans. It looked like a lot of fun. But like as I'm like touring one of the dorms, like I get the email from like MIT admissions. I'm just like, oh, like it's about to happen. Either I'm there. I open an email and I'm just like, and everybody on this tour is like, what's going on with him? And I'm like, I just got into MIT. And then like the tour
You're
guy's
like,
like,
I'm gonna stop this tour now.
Yeah, this guy's not coming here. You can go home early. Like it was just,
Sure.
yeah. So
What a cool moment.
but I mean, I think the lesson there for me is just like, honestly, it's not enough to be ready. Sometimes you just have to advocate for yourself. Sometimes you have to fight for it. Because if I didn't fight for it, I probably would have been a Harvard student, and that would have been sad. So,
So
come
let me
on.
ask you this then. So you made it to MIT,
Yeah.
congratulations. And then
Thank
you
you very
get to
much.
this place in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is basically Boston, Massachusetts. And it's a primarily white institution, PWI as they call it. How did it feel once you got there? Did you fit right in?
Chicago is a rainbow of a city. It's got its problems with like segregation. Like you can cross the street from like the black neighborhood that's 99.9% black, and then it's all like 99.9% Hispanic. Then you like walk a few more blocks and it's like 50% Italians, 50% Anglo-Saxon white. So Chicago's built like that. But, in the schools, moving around the city, you learn to talk to everybody, you learn to be comfortable with everybody. So I was okay. I was okay with it because of where I grew up. I think culturally different. So I have to kind of find the communities where people could at least understand my background a little better. Not to say that I can't be friends with like other people who aren't black, but to say that like they're just like tough moments where it's like, wow, I just got a 14 on this homework assignment, on this quiz. I think I want to die, and I think it's easier for people who share similar backgrounds with you to comfort you and to understand and to like kind of get you back to a healthy mental state. It's easier for them to do it than for someone who they're friends with you, they're cool with you, but they can't quite relate as deeply to what it took for you to get there, where you're getting a 14% on a quiz. Yeah, for me, I found that community in Chocolate City, which is like a section of a dorm that is how you describe ourselves. A bunch of colored dudes.
And it's called Chocolate
Black
City.
say. Yeah. Yeah. Black dudes, Hispanic dudes. Basically, it was created in the 1975 as kind of a bulwark, a community that could stand together and be comfortable, and at that time was still an extremely racist institution to be a part of.
Oh, wow.
Like MIT in the 90s, you could still walk down dorm row and like you'd have somebody on the top of PBE like allegedly calling you the N-word. You know, I heard it from my elder alumni, but I wasn't there. I wasn't there in the 90s. You know? But like things like that weren't uncommon. America, thankfully, has made a lot of growth in the last 50 years. That's what it was in its inception. I think today people look like at an organization like Chocolate City and say, like, well, like that's reverse racism, but like that's not the point. The point was at this institution when Chocolate City was started, there was no place for us to come home and take recourse, you know, from the pain of academia, the pain of being the only ones here. So that's the function I think it still serves as a base for people with those shared experiences to jump into MIT and do the best job they can do. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you were able to find that place. I think, the United States in the last couple of years is seeming to go backwards a little bit, depending on who you ask. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that those spaces exist for people who need them. I remember you graduated in 2017 or
2018.
2018. Okay, so you were there then in 2016, the first time that Donald Trump won the presidency when he beat Hillary Clinton, which was a surprise
Yeah.
to pretty much
Everyone.
everyone. And I remember being there and they closed the school the next day and basically canceled all the classes. And I don't know if you remember, but they put up on the pillars at the beginning of the infinite hallway, they put up these white pieces of paper where people could write things that they were scared about or angry about or sad about. Do you remember that time and being there in that
Yes,
moment?
for sure. For sure. It was, I was having lunch. No, I was having dinner with an undergraduate before the announcement was made that Hillary won. And what I remember is that there was just so much confidence in people knowing what America was going to do and people thinking they know what their fellow Americans' values are. Like, there's no way this country would elect somebody who grabs vaginas for fun. There's no way this country would elect somebody who talks like that, who doesn't have an actual professional history, whose companies have all gone bankrupted, right? Who's like a professional whatever. There's no way we would do that. We're better than that. But like, for me, as a Black American, I think I've always seen the two faces of America. There's a face where it likes to show you that you can come here, work hard, and everything's going to work out for you. Then there's the face of America that, you know, is less pleasant. So I wasn't actually surprised when Hillary won because I acknowledge that there is a vast portion of this country that I don't understand very well. And I feel a little scared being there by myself alone. You know, I don't know if you've heard of a sundown town, but these are effectively towns during the Jim Crow era where if you were outside and Black, you're allowed to be lynched or hung. And so these towns still exist. We have maps for where they are, and they're mostly concentrated around the central parts of the states, but that's still there. There are still people out there who think this way. So I do remember that at MIT. I do remember like a feeling of sadness, but also a feeling of like, yeah, now you all see America's true colors for what I thought this was the whole time.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is it like in China being, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party? How do people feel about politics over there?
So politics aren't as much of a hot topic discussion because you have no agency here. You can have your opinion, and it doesn't matter, or in the worst case, will get you in trouble. So there's no point in talking about it, really. People have opinions, of course, but those would be your close friends behind closed doors that you would chat about, and So yeah, I mean, how do people feel about the CCP? The CCP is the organ that brought China out of abject poverty to where it is today. The CCP is a government that's run by engineers and intellectuals. Actually, the bar to be a CCP member means that you are probably the top 5% of your class academically. This is not like, sure, there's ideology involved, but this is not just people blindly following beliefs. These are like the elites of their society who have now been placed in positions of power to drive this country towards a better place. I mean, the CCP created all of this, dude. Like, they created all this explosive economic development. This is the result of their market after they course corrected, right? I'm not going to say it was an entirely rosy history of the Communist Party in China. There are a lot of accidental genocides from, starving people, not having enough food because they're like diverted resources to making metal, you know, cultural revolutions where people are trying to like kill the landlords or like kill the people who weren't loyalists. There was a lot of that was happening. That was less than ideal. But in 1978, they did this thing called 改革开放, open up and reform is what that means. And that's when they started making all these special economic zones like Shenzhen, Xiamen, Shanghai, where you were, instead of following, kind of this controlled communist economy system, they experimented with capitalism under very tight controls. And so then from there, we get to where we are in present day China, where, these cities have become, bastions of, capital, productive capacity, all of those things. I say all this to say that like people see the CCP as this big demon, like we're still in the Cold War, but I see the CCP as a collection of engineers that have created a country and are driving it in a way that we would never be able to do in the States, because we're run by Yale law graduates, right? Or if they have a degree at all, right? Like, I don't know who's
Sure.
running us.
No,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. Do people talk to you about the American government?
Well, yeah, the Chinese love to gossip about America. It's like, it's fun for them.
So
Some of
how
them
do
are
they?
like, Trump is like, some of them
No,
are
go
like,
ahead.
we love Trump, he's hilarious. They just like, every time Trump's making a new announcement, they're just like, "Ah, he's so funny." Some of them think he's a strong man, because he talks so strong. I don't think many of them think or care that much about the geopolitical ramifications what Trump is trying to do right now. And I do think US and China, both of these countries separately have their own news ecosystems,
Mhm.
where in China, if a Chinese kid is murdered at the UIUC or Brandon Champagne, that will be published to like every news source in the country immediately and
In China.
repeatedly published. Yeah. And it will be emphasized how America is such a dangerous country, you know? Whereas in America, that might have made the Illinois news. Maybe that made the, national news for a moment, but it's not going to be discussed in the same way. Now, on the flip side, in the States, like, we emphasize the things we don't like, right? China is this surveillance state. People don't have their freedoms, right? I think growing up in the States, I thought China was like a backwater where like people don't think for themselves. Far from it. Like, I would say I
Frankly,
have more, yeah.
I was a little worried about our conversation. I had heard that the internet in China is spotty.
Well, my house is on a VPN. My house Wi-Fi is on a VPN, so I can talk to people and I can use Facebook. I think the point is just like, don't go on a VPN and start spreading anti-China government propaganda, stuff like that, right? I think we're small peanuts. Like, we're not the ones trying to start revolutions. We're not the ones trying to bring democracy to China. I don't have that agenda. We're barely able to keep democracy working in America. Like, you guys keep this battle. You guys can have it. So yeah, man, I don't worry too much about the surveillance state. I just accept it as a reality, right? China surveils us and tells us they do, and America does it in secret. What are we talking about,
Sure.
Would you agree with that point?
And that's on both sides of the political spectrum. I think that program was expanded under Obama, actually,
Mm.
which people often like to forget. But even I, need to acknowledge that the Patriot Act and all those things were expanded under Obama. Yeah, that's fascinating, man. Thanks for sharing all that information about China. I think a lot of people would be really interested to hear about, an American's experience in China, especially you're so integrated in the culture, but also the economy over there. I mean, as you mentioned, we often consider China to be the global powerhouse when it comes to manufacturing, and you have your hands in so many different places. I mean, you freaking worked at Apple, man. Like, that's pretty wild. In the parts where like my iPhone was made, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
Which is
crazy, bro.
fascinating.
It's so crazy.
So before we close, let me ask you one question. What do you think is a misconception that Americans have about Chinese people, Chinese government, being in China in general? Just any sort of what rumor would you like to dispel?
Okay, what are the rumors that we could dispel? We could talk about tariffs. We could talk about
Yeah.
Chinese individuals. Let's talk about the society, talk about the government.
Tell me about tariffs. I think it's top of mind for a lot of people. Basically, it swings our economy every day. What's going on with the tariffs?
Yeah, I mean, they are. It was a terrible policy from the get go. I was in DC attending this like U.S. China um it's kind of a foreign relations convention. So talking of all these DC think tank guys, DC government guys, and they're just saying how like Trump currently has no coherent policy. Policy is kind of a set of strategies that are guiding your behavior, that are guiding the behavior of departments towards a certain action. And like we don't have that with Trump. We have impulse. We have, okay, I want to make a deal. Like, okay, well, it's chaotic. Tariffs don't work. Tariffs end up hurting Americans. Like a lot of my clients come from the States, and like they're the ones paying the tariffs. It's never going to be the people on the Chinese side. That being said, all of that being said, there are ways around the tariffs, right? That's like there are strategies to be implemented to avoid tariffs by either, you know, illegal strategies, which are like misdeclaring what you're shipping or underdeclaring value of what you're shipping. Then there are more legal strategies, which are kind of if the cost of a single good is split between, within this $100 smart watch, what are the costs included? IP, service, assembly, opening a mold, and then actual the final material costs. So I can get those four costs to be one-time fees, then my final burden at the checkpoint is lower. So strategies around the tariffs, big picture, I think even recently he just like walked back almost all of the tariffs because he had a nice meeting with Xi Jinping and now they're friends now. So now we're back to January 2025 before we did any tariffs. I don't know what was accomplished besides taking a lot of money out of Americans' pockets. Terrible idea. And yeah, that's my opinion. But that's
Yeah.
not really a rumor to dispel.
Right.
I think here's one. I think people look at China like they're aliens, like they're all communists, like they don't have freedom of speech or thought. Freedom of speech arguable. But I would say, I mean, both of our countries, I think, have a lot more in common than we do have different. If we don't look at the government, right? We don't look at the government form. We look at what's actually happening, right? We have massive rural to urban gaps and kind of socioeconomic mobility, capital, these allocations, these exist in both of our countries, right? We occupy nearly the same landmass when, US and China are like add all the US, add all of China. We're basically the same size countries, but China is like four times, the population is four times larger. Individuals here, right? There are young Chinese people who don't want to work in factories anymore. They do this thing now they call tangping, which means to lay flat. So like they'll just like not work for a year, like be like 25-year-old, and they're just like, I'm not interested in all of this stuff anymore. Like Shanghai is one of the most capitalist cities I've ever seen. Shanghai makes New York look poor. I promise you. You walk down the street in Shanghai, you're going to see more LV, Gucci, Prada, more brand name cars, Teslas, like limousines. You're going to see more of that arguably than you'll see anywhere in Manhattan. I bet on it, right? So I would position US and China to have a lot more in common than they do have that's different. Everybody here is striving for their own version of their China dream. A lot of people here are entrepreneurs. A lot of my local friends here are building their own companies, trying to build their own tech startups, right? I see a lot more things in common than I do see different. So I would encourage people to like kind of divest from I'm not going to call it the fake news media, but I'm going to call it the media that has a democratic bias, because that's ultimately what it is. It's ultimately, I believe, Cold War behavior. I think you need to come and make your own opinions, make your own friends, and like see it for yourself. I think that's the best way. Yeah. Because
Josh,
otherwise, like, yeah.
Josh, that was fascinating. And I really appreciate you sharing your experience and showing us how maybe we're not all so different after all.
I'm glad it was valuable, man. It's my daily life, bro.
Thanks, man.